So welcome everybody to our session today. Our conversation today is going to be focused on how to build your procurement transformation, leveraging the three foundational pillars of people, process, and technology to deliver continuous value through innovation and community impact. And joining me today for the conversation is none other than Len DeCandia. Len is the Chief Procurement Officer and President of Services at Johnson & Johnson. Welcome, Len.
Well, thank you. Happy to be here today.
Yeah, great to have you. And I think everybody knows who you are, but for those folks who don't, maybe if you could say a couple of lines about yourself, that'd be great.
Sure. So yes, I'm the Global Chief Procurement Officer at Johnson & Johnson. Actually, I started my career there in a few days. It'll be 40 years ago, but made a few stops along the way. Probably for the past 25 years, I've either been Chief Supply Officer or a Chief Procurement Officer for three other companies, including Johnson & Johnson. So it's been a great perspective. I think probably growing up in engineering and manufacturing, and then the early days of supply chain. And then about 10 or 12 years ago, I really transitioned from focusing to supply chain to procurement because I was really excited about how we've become much more integrated and collaborative from the standpoint of no one really can execute with speed and innovation alone. And the role of the supplier has really been elevated and continues to be elevated. So happy to have come back to Johnson & Johnson a little less than 8 years ago. And I'll tell you a little bit about the story and what that transformation has been all about, at least for our organization.
That's fantastic, Lynn. Thanks so much. And it really is a pretty exciting time to be in procurement, given everything that's been going on, frankly, not just in the last year with the pandemic, but even before that, if you look at the last 5-10 years. And DPW is a great example of that, of just the innovation and change that's occurring in procurement. And so I'm sure we're going to touch on aspects of technology, but what I also want to talk about as we go through our conversation today are these aspects around process and people, which is so important. I know you firmly believe that, and you've lived by that in terms of how you've developed the team at J&J, all the good work that's being done there. But let's kick off. I guess to just start off the conversation, maybe we can start with your procurement transformation journey at J&J, and where has that come from? Where are you today? Where are you going? How do you sort of think about that entire procurement transformation journey?
Yeah, I think it's probably best to put us into the context of the company, the history of the company, and then how the function and the history of the function, right? So the company is started in 1886. So for about 130 years, leading up to 2016, the company really thrived and has grown on the concept of decentralization. So many people know Johnson & Johnson probably more for our consumer products, but it's a fairly large and complex organization. I think we're probably going to be close to doing about $93 to $95 billion in revenue this year. And if you look at market cap, we're probably number 10 or 11 in the world. So it's a large company that grew on decentralization. And the complexity is really the fact that the company is really based on three key business segments. As I mentioned earlier, the consumer business, but our largest and probably 50% of our revenue is from the pharmaceutical business. And then another good piece is our medical device business. So it's large, it's complex, it's grown on decentralization. And now you're going to take a procurement function that's been decentralized for 130 years and make it more of a center-led organization. So I think that the early challenges for me coming back is the fact that I had done these transformations at other organizations. And the good thing is I spent my first 15 years of my career there. So I understood the culture and the vocabulary. And it's really a very much of an organization that you lead from the heart. So how do you connect the heart and mind around driving that transformation? And so now you're dealing with a couple of big issues, right? With procurement being decentralized, the focus of activities were very different, whether it was within a business sector or a region or a local area. Probably more important along with that is you had multiple technologies that you were running on, right? So you've had multiple ERP systems around the world, no common data sources. And probably, for me, the number one challenge was how the internal organization viewed good. So what was a common definition of procurement being good in an organization where good had multiple definitions relative to the situation either the business was in or the region or the local market was operating in, right? So that's the context, right? But then there was this recognition around the fact that that incredible complexity would make it very difficult for Johnson & Johnson to be able to deliver and execute innovation when your suppliers are such a great source of that innovation. And that complexity creates an incredible amount of friction, which really interferes with your ability to drive best practices through the organization or to drive value from your supplier source to execution to your patients and customers. So that's kind of what we were given as a terms of my walk-in situation back in my return to Johnson & Johnson.
Got it. And there's so many themes you touched on there that are, gosh, that's so fascinating. I love the fact that you mentioned this idea of what is good.
Right.
And so often, and this happens to all of us, I mean, I think we tend to define good ourselves, right?
Right.
I know what good is, right? Let me tell you what good is. And I like the fact that you went and took the effort to understand what good was in the context of your internal organization and internal customers. So that's kind of fascinating. The other aspect is in terms of a method for dealing with that complexity. Again, you didn't look inward. You said, we're going to look outwards. And not to put words in your mouth, but what you're saying essentially is we can't do it all ourselves. Let's collaborate. Let's work with folks to get there. Is that fair in terms of how?
No, absolutely right. I mean, you have to recognize, the recognition is when you're the world's largest healthcare company and you're really trying to deliver next generation solutions to unmet needs, you have to be extremely collaborative. You have to look outside your four walls for that innovation across, all the areas of spend, right? And so, we're talking about an average spend of about $30 billion, right? But think about it this way, in many, many cases, people have a tendency to put procurement kind of in that supply chain alley, but we're a research-based organization and 75% of our spend is non-supply chain, right? And so I think what we recognize and what we really wanted to go after first is that 75% spend when you're starting to talk about research, development, commercial strategies, the advent of e-commerce and being able to stay on top of that. But most importantly, our customers, our patients, those needs are constantly evolving. So how can you keep up with it? And how can you leverage and make sure you're making a couple of very important, serious strategic decisions? What capabilities are you going to invest in and be very good at internally? You have to decide that first, so that then you go and say, okay, what investments do we need to make in relationships externally that complement our internal capabilities in order to drive and achieve our mission and vision? And so what you're really talking about is shaping your supplier base. And so what should your supplier base look like not only today, but tomorrow to be able to meet those needs? And so it's a very different conversation around the role of the function in partnering internally and then aligning internally so you can better partner externally to be able to create that infrastructure that you need to be able to compete, but more importantly to win, right, in a world that's constantly changing.
Just on that point then, speaking of the world being constantly changing, clearly the pandemic has been I was going to say material event for all of us, but I think that's an understatement to use that term. I've said this before, but I sort of think about the Great Recession as being probably the worst crises I'll ever go through in my life, and lo and behold, that wasn't the case.
That's right.
We dealt with this. So I'd like to ask you. Let me first say, by the way, thank you to the folks at J&J for all the great work you've done around the vaccine, and which I think is going a long way to getting us back to some kind of normal, at least on the path towards that. How did that either disrupt or accelerate this transformation journey with your team and across J&J?
Yeah, first, let me just give you a humble thank you on behalf of really all of the great people in our company that have brought us to this point and will take us to the next level with that. And I think it's an incredible challenge for our entire industry. And I don't think anything is more important than the frontline healthcare workers and the people that are really dealing with the issues every day. And I hope for everyone that they're safe and their family and friends are safe and in a good place. We were fortunate. I think because of this transformation, we really launched our initiative around being a future-ready organization in 2016. And the first thing we had to do was really create the environment that was going to allow us to be successful. So we started our journey in investing in technology and in process and practices, right? How do we get all of our information, all of our transactions in one place so that we can start to look at where and how and with whom we spend our money. And we were ultimately at a point by 2019 where we pretty much had if not the world's largest, one of the largest cloud-based e-marketplaces in the world. You're talking about, an organization that does about, 4 million payments, 30,000 contracts a year, 700,000 POs, and getting all that information in one place was critical for us. And then introducing and creating an organizational structure that would allow us to achieve that vision of really being a procurement function that creates an environment that takes complexity out from our supplier base and drives innovation as quickly and as scalable as we possibly can to our organization. I think the accelerator as it relates to the pandemic was change management. When you've spent so many years being told this was good, and in many, many cases, good was just being a cost savings machine, right. And we wanted to add more dimensions to all of that. The pandemic really drove greater adoption in two dimensions. Adoption number one, in that the uptake in our use of our e-marketplace, preferred suppliers, it just shot through the roof, right? And so we were there. Maybe it was serendipitous. Maybe we were fortunate, and I have to give credit to our board and our executive committee to give me and our team the support and the resource investments to do that. But now all of a sudden, everyone's working from home around the world, and they need to continue to run the business and buy. And guess what? We were ready in there with a marketplace up and running and fully deployed around the world, right? So the adoption went through the roof. We were making continuous investments around the experience of using that tool. And so when we first launched, our net promoter scores were like in the 30s and 40s, right? Because we went to places in the world like Dubai, where we have our operation, and they were like, what's a purchase order, right? And so now we had to introduce a system. And now we're talking about net promoter scores in the low 80s, which is unheard of, right? Because people recognize the value and use of preferred suppliers and buying channels in the mid 80s. So that accelerated adoption and use. And it really allowed us to continue to run the business effectively, given the challenges of the pandemic and given the role of being the world's largest healthcare provider and all that.
Yeah.
The other area of change management was with the procurement professionals, So with the procurement professionals now, with a lot of that process being automated and running on its own, and how could they spend more time understanding the dynamics of the market that were changing every day, right? We operate in 60, 65 markets around the world. Every one of those markets had a different impact as it relates to the pandemic. Who was shut down, who was open, who was semi-shut down. So understanding the markets, understanding what was happening at the customer and patient level, being able to deliver that value to them. So what it did, it really leveraged the technology and practices that we had defined and put in place, and really drove incredible adoption and accelerated that adoption. And we are seeing it in terms of how our people are spending their days today, and how work and spend is flowing through the organization. Just this year alone, we've seen a 20 to 30% increase in our buying activity, in our contracting activity, in our sourcing activity around all of that. And cycle times that are, 1/2 to 1/3 to what they were before the pandemic and before this transformation.
And almost nobody's in the office doing
that. Right.
Which, 2 years ago,
right now.
Right.
Right.
We wouldn't have believed that. So a lot of great points there. Getting ready ahead of time and making the right investments before you think you need them, because clearly that paid off in terms of the marketplace, et cetera, when the pandemic hit. The point around the procurement professionals is a particularly salient one. As I sort of think about where procurement has come from and the opportunity we have, that point you made. Our historical role has been around cost savings, but it's so much more that can be done. I have this sort of view that procurement should really be the #1 value creator for any business, right? And I think there's a real opportunity to be able to raise the level of thinking, not just from a cost perspective, but from an innovation, from a sustainability perspective, all of these aspects. How do you sort of think about that particular point, and does that resonate as you think about what J&J is trying to do?
Yeah, well, I love the concept of #1, but we've got a lot of reframing and reshaping work that gets procurement, from where it's been traditionally to that point. But I'll tell you, kind of where we're at in our journey, right? So I think initially we really had to create this environment that allows everything that's happening today to actually happen, right? Yeah. And you're thinking about the fact that, this started for us. This whole pandemic started for us back in January because, China is such an important market for us, and we have many customers and patients there and employees there, whatever else. So by being fully integrated and networked by technology, we were able to get way out in front on PPE acquisition so that we can keep our plants running. We could be able to support communities. We supported frontline healthcare workers throughout the world as that whole area scaled up. And you look at products that we make like Tylenol. Last year our Tylenol volume doubled. So how are we able to support that, right? By having that network, by being able to leverage our abilities to source and team and collaborate internally so that we can optimize externally in a scalable fashion. And for me, agility is really about speed and scale, right? So now we've got that. And now what we're talking about and where we're going is that the message and our theme is partnering for growth and good, right? Because what the business is really looking for from our supplier base is the ability to provide next generation solutions that grows the business. So how do we accelerate those supplier innovations through the organization, right? And we're living in a world now through this whole change where we've accelerated ESG, right? So now how are we using those relationships and those investments, right, to elevate our experiences within the local communities that we operate in? So if you think about growth and you think about good, and then you think about one of the areas that I'm very proud of through the use of technology and creating this infrastructure is our spend with diverse and minority-owned suppliers has gone up over 50% in the past 5 years, right? Because we've integrated into our strategies. We've actually created a marketplace within the marketplace for diverse suppliers. Well, diverse suppliers is good business. And why is it good business? Because they're very relevant at a local level. They understand what's happening within those communities. They understand the patient and customer challenges within those communities. So now, how can you translate your solutions at a global, regional, and local level? Well, because your supplier base is global, regional, and local, you're able to use that supplier base for insights and data. So not only do they bring you, technology, but they also bring you insights. And then when you think about the changing world that we're in, shareholders recognize now that strong ESG strategies is going to be good for business, right? Because guess what? You have to understand your patients and customers at a local level. Your employees and your talent expect you to operate in the world as a good citizen, right? Those communities where you're interested not only in their health, but in their environment, because in our world, a great portion of health and healthcare is around the environment that people live in. So what contributions are you making to all of that, right? So procurement now has gone from a single kind of a one-lane road to a superhighway, right? We need to operate in that superhighway around innovation, around sustainability, around community impact and social impact, right? As well as continue to deliver value as it relates to getting the best value and delivering that value to your patients and customers. So how we're going to manage this transition from being on a one lane country road to this super highway, where those critical stakeholders understand that at the end of the day, I think my role and procurement's role in any organization is the tide that lifts all boats. Yeah. In reality, we have to turn everyone within Johnson & Johnson into being a great supplier relationship management individual, right? Because at the end of the day, we create that environment that allows internal to external collaboration. And in many experiences, we're kind of there up to the contract and then we leave. But the work begins after the contract is signed. And usually when we're brought in, it's because something went south. But if we're part of that whole life cycle, maybe helping with better understanding the market, who the right players can be, clarity of expectations, internal to external, and the deliverables against that, and then really creating that platform with the tens of thousands of people who work with external suppliers at Johnson & Johnson, know that they're working with the right partner in an area of trust and competency, where they know where they should be and how they should be, what role we could play in the governance of all of that, and then delivering that value. I think that's really where procurement is going, right? Being the stewards of that superhighway that allows all of the budget owners in your organization to be able to look at that supplier base and understand where they can go as it relates to innovation, where they can go as it relates to amplifying your strategies and creating a better and a new world, where they can go to better understand what's happening in the communities, in the local areas that they do businesses, as it relates differentiated there or at a global level, and ultimately how an organization can take whatever resources they have in place and invest them in the most value-added way. Many organizations train people on how to be good people managers, but we all get two things as leaders. We get people and we get budgets. And so we really not only need to understand how to best manage our people, but we need to best manage our budgets or our external capabilities to leverage our internal capabilities to drive the best and most innovative agile solution in a world that's constantly evolving. When the patients and the customers stop changing, we'll stop changing. I don't think that's going to happen, right?
Which is not.
But that's the vision, right? The vision is creating, and in many cases, automation creates a world where that's happening real time, and we're behind the screen. So all those suppliers are preferred. All of those governance issues are around labor practices, around cybersecurity, all of that's taken care of. So I need to problem solve. It's there. And within minutes, I have a solution that I'm moving forward with. And that's really the world that we continue to evolve in. And we're actually living in many, many cases, whether it's in the R&D environment, the commercial environment, or even in our supply chain environment.
Well, that's fantastic, Len. We're right up on time now. We could certainly go on for another half hour and have this conversation. Look, I think there's a lot of points that you've talked about that resonate really well. This aspect around foundational aspects and pillars around people, process, technology, the multifaceted view, being ready ahead of time, aligns very nicely. We talk a lot about what we call AI plus HI, bringing tech with people, analytics and intelligence together with the people to get things done. And I think that aligns really well. And of course, procurement's role, which is evolving. And I just want to say to everybody listening, procurement superhighway, you heard it here first. So thanks, Len. Appreciate you taking the time today. Appreciate the conversation.
Thank you. Take care, all.
Thanks.